Good afternoon, beekeepers and bee enthusiasts. How you doing? It's another great day at the farm, and we are just hanging outside. It's about 45 degrees outside. It's cold. It's wet. Uh, as you can see from our elderberry hive over here, we're seeing little to no activity. And a lot of people would look at that and say, oh my God, I've got to check on my bees. I got to see what's going on the inside. But we're actually not going to do that. Which brings us to our next episode of Analyzing the Natural Beekeeping Central Commandments. Let's break right into it. So the first part, the next episode, I should say, of this episode of Analyzing the Natural Beekeeping Central Commandments. Let's take a look at page 100. Let's see, right here. Okay, here we go. Don't bother the bees unless it is extremely necessary, with the exception of the two major annual inspections, one in the spring and one in the fall. Now, how is that different from how we see a lot of traditional beekeeping today in the modern times? Well, a lot of beekeepers and a lot more traditional styles, they are taught, and what they usually do is, you got to get in those hives and you got to check on those girls. That's what I hear people say. I got to check on the girls. I got to check on the girls. And beekeepers get into this mindset where they say, okay, I always have to know what my bees are doing, and the only way I can do that is by opening the hive, looking at the brood, looking for the queen, looking at food stores, checking up on my bees, looking at them all the time. But as Federer Zuten talks about in this book, and one little part we're going to get to, is disturbing the bees can actually be very stressful for them, and it can be a huge amount of stress on the bees. So I want to go ahead and open up to a section of this book where he actually talks more about the topic, and so you can hear it right from the author, and you understand kind of from our point of view. Let's see. Okay. So this is what Zuten has to say on this certain topic of the natural beekeeping central commandments. Keep interference in the life of a bee colony to a minimum. Any experienced beekeeper will confirm that the less the bees are bothered, the better. George de Lance was already emphasizing this 150 years ago. Excessive interference distracts the colony from gathering nectar, drastically increases the likelihood of swarming, and triggers aggression, particularly in the European dark bee. Keeping bees in horizontal hives with extra deep frames reduces the number of interventions in the life of a bee colony to just one per year, namely the spring inspection, carried out as early as possible when the bees are less perturbed by an inspection of their nest area. So, holy cow, he brings up what we think is a really good point in the fact that if you are constantly going to these hives, and you're constantly checking it. And I'm not just talking about in the spring, summer, fall. I'm talking about the winter too. Because, like I said earlier, a lot of beekeepers would see this and see this lack of activity, and they'd say, oh my gosh, I've got to get inside that hive and see how the bees are doing. But did you know about 2 days ago, it was about 60 degrees outside, and these bees were totally active, and they were doing just fine. But now it's cold, it's wet. Bees don't like this weather. They don't get active in this kind of weather, so they stay inside for the most part. And like I said, a lot of people, and we'll break into this different sections, but a lot of people get in the habit, they say, I've got to look at my bees, I've got to check on my bees, I've got to see what they're doing. But in a lot of cases, when you do check on them, you could actually be making it worse for the bees, and a lot of times you are. So what we are here to teach today in this episode is how much we can get away with very little disturbance. When I say little disturbance, I mean one annual inspection in the year, just one inspection, and how we can get away with that and still be able to look at hives and tell if they're good to go or if maybe they are perished or not. So I think it's going to be a great topic, and let's just go right into it. Okay, so the first topic we want to talk about when we're having this discussion is, what are the effects of constantly going in and checking on hives? I see a lot of traditional styles teach that, you go in every other week or so and you're checking on your bees and you're seeing what they're doing. But what is the effect of opening these hives and checking on them? And we'll just say, generally speaking, not even in the spring or winter or whatever. But you got to think, when the first thing that happens when you crack open that hive and you start pulling frames out and you're starting to look at your bees and you're checking them all out, the temperature, which is very strictly regulated inside the hive by the bees, the temperature suddenly shifts, and now the bees, bam, just like that, are like, what is going on? And a lot of times, don't take offense to this, but I see a lot of beekeepers really try to humanize their bees. And when I say humanize, I mean like we treat them like we would treat a dog or a cat or another household pet. We talk to the bees. We say, "Oh, I love you," and "Oh, you're just amazing." And don't get me wrong, I love the bees. They are very dear to me. However, a lot of people get in the habit where they just want to sit there and talk to their bees. And what you got to understand is bees are not like dogs and cats, like where the animal is like really excited to see you. When you open up a hive, and now you're looking at all the frames, the bees are suddenly very stressed out and they're like, what is this creature that is dividing up our home and looking at us all of a sudden? So they get it's a very stressful event for them. And like Federer says, you could see more aggression with bees by doing that. You could have more swarming. Maybe they could abscond if they're that worried about their home being invaded. So there's lots of effects that occur when you crack open that hive. And I know we all want to look at our bees. I know we all want to. It's just, we love them so much, and we want to make sure they're doing okay. And if there's not something right, we want to know that instant, and we've got to know right away. But you got to understand is bees are not like household pets. Like, they are an insect, and they have a primary purpose in life, and that is to survive and to collect honey for the winter. That is their primary purpose. And compared to like a dog who is, so excited to see the human being whenever the human comes in the house, bees don't see it that way. Like they have a mission and goals that they're trying to accomplish. And by you breaking into that hive and taking a look at them and seeing what they're doing and all the things they're up to, it is very stressful for them. And they don't understand what's occurring. That's the big thing. The bees don't understand what's occurring, and if they had it their way, you would never be in that hive. That's just the truth. If it was up to the bees, you would never be in that hive. You'd never be disturbing them, because they just don't want that interaction. They want to do their thing, and they don't want other people interacting with them. So real quick, for our next topic, let's talk about, what we do as natural beekeepers, how much we inspect and stuff like that. So let's get right into that. So talking about what we as natural beekeepers do, do we never go into the hive and just leave them alone and let them do what they're going to do? No, that is not true. We actually do go into the hive very rarely, I would say, we go into the hive. And I'll tell you exactly when we do. And so first, before I say how much we go into the hive, I want to define what I say when I say going into a hive. And what I mean by that is you're pulling out all the brood frames, looking at all the brood, all the bees, all that. That is doing a formal inspection, and that is actually going into each frame and checking on the bees. That's what I consider a inspection. Now, what I don't consider inspection is opening, say, the top and then putting winter insulation and all that stuff on the inside. I don't really consider that an inspection or anything like that, because you're not really disturbing the bees. So what we do as natural beekeepers is in the spring, we will do an inspection of the hive and we will check on them. So when it gets to be like 65 degrees out here on average, we see activity coming in and out of the hive, then we will go into the hive and we will basically look at the frames. We will check for brood, we'll check for food. That's the two big things, brood and food. Look for brood and food. If you see brood and food, you're good to go. Now, do you need to sit there and spend 20 minutes looking for the queen? No, you don't, okay? You don't need to find the queen. If you see brood, the queen has to be in there. She has to be in there. There's no way that brood would be there if there was not a laying queen. So if you see brood, you can really speed up your inspection by saying, okay, I see the brood. I don't need to go and look for the queen and spend 20 minutes looking for her, and all that stuff. And really, again, We're trying to reduce the amount of stress that we're doing as we're doing these inspections, because we are interfering with the bees, and we're trying to cut that to a small amount. So when we see brood, we can make the assumption that the queen is inside. So we see the brood, okay, good to go. Do they have food? Yes, they do have food. Okay, no, they don't have food. Do we want to consider adding some honey, etc., etc., stuff like that? So that is pretty much the only time, or the only things we're really looking for: brood and food. And when we see those things, we will cycle out some of the frames and cycle in new frames, because you want to be able to cycle out frames every now and then, so you're getting all the old comb out that's been there for like a long time. But you are going in, you're looking for the brood and the food, and you're good to go. And that's it. And that's all we do. You'll notice we did an inspection, let's see, last year. You can find the video for it. We'll probably do an inspection video this year too, where we basically show you what we do in an inspection. And you'll see I'm pretty quick with it. I don't sit there and have long conversations and look for the queen and all that stuff. If I do see the queen, great, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for brood and food. And so then we basically put the frames back in. And what we're doing this year that's different than what we did last year is this year we're adding all of our honey frames to the hives right at the start of the season. Once we see some good weather here, and we know the weather is going to be good for until the end of the year, we're going to add all the frames and fill up the hives. And then guess what? We're not going to disturb them for the entire year. Not until the fall, where when the fall comes, it's time to extract frames, we will go in, we'll take the honey frames out, but we won't go into the brood chamber or anything like that. So I don't consider that a full inspection, because you're not going to the brood chamber. You are opening up the side of the hive and you're taking out honey frames, but it's not the same as opening up brood and looking at brood and all that stuff. So those are the two big things we're going to do in the year, and that's basically it. That's all the disturbance we need to do. And you're probably saying, okay, Wes, but how do you know if the bees are alive or dead? How do you know? Well, right now, some of you would probably look at this hive, and I bet you some of you would say this hive is dead. And you'd say it's gone, because you're not seeing any activity. But like I said earlier, just 2 days ago, it was 65 degrees outside, and it was very active. And what you have to remember is bees just do not like cold weather or cloudy weather either. It's like full cloud cover right now, and bees don't like that stuff. So when you look at a hive like this, it's not a fair judgment today to say, okay, the colony is alive or it's gone. And one thing I want to point out, let's assume I thought that this colony was dead and I wanted to check. So I go in and I check. Now there's two outcomes. It's like a it's like I forgot the name of that box or whatever, from that scientist, whether the cat's in the box or not. But basically, you go in the hive, there's two different outcomes. Either the bees are alive or the bees are dead. One or the other. It's they're alive or they're dead. Now, if they're dead, then me checking on them doesn't change anything. They're still dead, and that's all there is to it. They're gone, and, I could have figured this out a little bit later, and the reason why, because if I check that hive and they're alive in there, now you've exposed the bees to the outside temperature. You've cooled them off, because remember, they keep warmer air with them to keep themselves heated, but you're exposing all the air, and now all the cold air is getting into the hive, and now all you've done is harm the bees. And I've done it before. One time we had bees like in February when we first started keeping bees, and we had someone open our colonies in like February, and nothing against that person, it's just what it was. But looking back, like, I would never open my bees in February, because that is very cold weather, and if they're alive and you open that hive, you're just harming them. That's all you're doing, okay? And that's just the way it is. So you can save yourself and save the bees' health if they're still alive by just being patient and waiting till, like, let's say you get a 65 or 70 degree weather day. And then if it's like 65, 70 degrees and it's sunny outside and you don't see any bees, that's a pretty good judgment that they've probably perished. okay? But if, like, whenever we have had days that are above 65 degrees, like, all of our, like, last I checked, like 6 out of 8 of our colonies were active. But today I'm looking at all our colonies and none of them are active because it's cold and wet outside. Like, so you can't just sit there and be like, holy cow, my bees, they're only going to survive if I check on them. If I got to check on them or else they're not going to make it. No, that's not, you checking on them is not going to change anything. It is going to make their chances worse. I will tell you that. It will make their chances worse if you open that hive. So just be a little patient. It's going to be okay. Bees are going to perish. That's one episode. It's not a natural beekeeping central command episode, but it is a thing we're going to make in the future where we talk about losing bee colonies, because some people are so like hyper focused on doing things to keep their bees alive. They're like, I got to keep my bees alive. I got to keep my bees alive. They're dear to me. If they perish, then I'm a failure, and all this other stuff. But guess what? I'm here to tell you, as an experienced beekeeper, you are going to lose colonies. I don't care if you had a perfect winter last year. At some point, you're going to lose colonies. People lose colonies because the truth is, if honeybees didn't have to fight for their survival throughout the whole year, then the world would be overrun with honeybees, and there'd be honeybees everywhere, and we'd be like, oh my gosh, there's too many honeybees. Bees are going to perish. They perish all the time, and there's no technique. I don't care if you're treatment free. I don't care if you treat your bees. I don't care if you feed sugar water. I don't care if you don't feed sugar water. I don't care if you keep a horizontal hive or a length hive. You are going to lose bees. So you might as well just get used to it. It's just a part of life. Like, sometimes bee colonies don't make it, and that's just the way it is. You know, if you have surviving colonies, then you've always got colonies to work with. But if you have a total loss, then you can look back at it and say, okay, what did I do? How can I improve? You know, is there something I can do better? Or maybe I was just unlucky, you know? So, you know, I didn't mean to get off on a tangent there, but, you know, a lot of beekeepers have that mindset when they think they have to check on the bees all the time. They have to look, because, you know, we humanize them. We make it so they're like our dogs or our cats. And if they die, then, oh my goodness, it's the end of the world. And you just have to remember that when you disturb those bees, you are making their chances of survival lower. And one thing I like to point at every time we do this series, I wish I would have said this at the start of the video, but if we look at bees in the wild and bees that stay in trees, okay, they don't get disturbed ever. Like, unless someone's just cutting down the tree or something like that, they never get disturbed. They never get disturbed. And yet they survive and they do fine, and these wild bees live just fine. Sometimes they die, and that's just the way, that's how it is. And like I was saying earlier, sometimes bees perish, just the way it is. But there are ones that survive, and the ones that survive, they reproduce through swarming, you know, and they do really well. So, you know, we are trying to do things more similar to how bees stay in the wild as natural beekeepers, and one of those things is disturbing the bees as little as possible. And if you can do that, you can do a lot better. And like I said, you can tell a lot by the outside of the hive without opening the hive. Basically, if you're seeing activity in the spring and fall, or summer and fall, if it's activity with, and they've got pollen on them, like if you're seeing activity, that's a good sign of your bees. Like, that's a good sign. Like, if there's no activity and the weather is like perfect outside, that's a bad sign. And you can tell really easily just by looking at the hive and based off the weather patterns. Like, you can tell pretty easily without opening the hive. So hope you learned a good bit from this video. We love this series so much. I love talking about this stuff, and we hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, like the video and consider subscribing and becoming part of our community. You know, every time we look at the analytics and see all the views and all the great comments and all that stuff motivates us to just make more videos. And we do love making these videos. This is purely educational. You know, we don't want to do advertisements or anything like that. We just want to teach people our ways of keeping bees. So please support us by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We'd really appreciate it. And we hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Natural Beekeeping Central Commandments. Take care.